Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a story that, well, it really blew up recently. Started as a small disagreement at an airport, but quickly became this huge national talking point. We're talking about the confrontation involving the Fuji music legend Wasiu Ayinde Marshall. You probably know him as Kwam1 and Valujet staff. This happened at Abuja's airport. And honestly, it wasn't just a simple argument. It turned into this fascinating, almost textbook case study. Yeah, a case study in how assumptions that aren't checked, gaps in procedure, and just really poor conflict management, how all that can snowball into a proper crisis. So, our mission today, to unpack the many layers of failure here, will be guided by insights from Remy Ledig-Belou's piece, excerpts from Kwam1 versus Valujet, Accountability and Aviation Safety. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let's unpack this. At the heart of it all was something pretty mundane, actually, a stainless steel flask. Kwam1, he'd gone through all the security layers, right? He was already inside the airport's sterile zone, past security in the final departure lounge, and then he was handed this flask. Now, his spokesperson, Rashid, he maintained very clearly that the flask just had drinking water in it, water he got from the lounge itself. And this is where aviation rules get really important. According to ICAO Annex 17, that's the International Civil Aviation Organization's guidelines, anything provided inside that secure, sterile area, it's assumed safe, it's cleared. So passengers who are already screened aren't supposed to be, re-interrogated about stuff they get in there, not unless there's a really clear, verifiable reason to do so. But Kwam1 was stopped from boarding. Why? On suspicion. Suspicion the flask had alcohol.
And that suspicion, that initial moment, that's really the linchpin here, isn't it? Because the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, the NCAA, they actually confirmed later that this suspicion, totally unverified. Michael Akamugu, their director of public affairs, he went on record saying, and this is a direct quote, the content of the flask was not confirmed to be alcohol, which is, what's clarifying, obviously, but it's also pretty damning. It basically says the whole reason for denying boarding, the trigger for everything that followed, just didn't have a factual basis. It was a subjective call. And in aviation, an industry built on standard operating procedures, suspicion alone, that should never, ever be enough.
That's a really stark point. So, denied boarding based on a hunch, essentially. But it didn't stop there, did it? Things escalated quite dramatically. After Kwam1 was told he couldn't board, he apparently tried to block the plane from leaving, positioned himself right there on the tarmac in front of the aircraft. Now, this action, some of which was caught on video, I believe, that's a serious breach of safety rules. Potentially criminal, even. Global aviation laws, local rules, they're crystal clear. Interfering with airport ops, trying to stop a plane from taxiing, that's moving on the ground. It's a punishable offense, no question. And while there wasn't clear video, apparently, of the alleged physical assault on a staff member, that act of trying to block the plane, that's verifiable, and it's really serious infraction.
Yeah, if we step back and look at the bigger picture here, Kwam1's actions on the tarmac, well, they highlight something fundamental about aviation safety. Passengers, no matter how provoked they might feel, are just not allowed to disrupt operational safety, not anyway. The safety of the flight, the airport, everyone involved, that it has to come first, it's non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Passenger conduct is key. But, the source material we're looking at makes it clear it's not just about Kwam1's actions. We also need to look closely at the airline's ground staff and maybe even the flight crew. Let's go back to the ground staff for a second. Their initial assumption about the flask. Well, as we said, no inspection, no testing, no real process followed. They didn't seem to have a solid, verifiable reason to deny boarding to someone already cleared by security. And then the flight crew. ICAO Annex 2, Section 3.2.2, it states pretty clearly, an aircraft shall not taxi on the movement area of an aerodrome without clearance from air traffic control. But the plane reportedly started taxiing while Kwam1 was apparently still visible nearby, which raises some pretty big questions, doesn't it? Did the crew actually get the proper clearance? Had they confirmed the taxi path was safe and clear, given the situation?
You've really zeroed in on the cascading effect here. It wasn't just one failure point. The idea that the crew might have started taxiing with an unresolved incident happening right there, with a person potentially on the tarmac, that just layers on more regulatory failure. It suggests potentially a serious breakdown in communication and following of procedures right across different parts of the airline's operation. It's quite concerning.
It really is concerning. It makes you ask, how can a system that's supposed to be so rigorous have these kinds of, potential gaps? So given all this complexity, how did the authorities react? The higher-ups, the Minister of Aviation, Festus Keyamo, he did acknowledge these multiple failures. His statement was quite detailed, actually. He condemned Kwam1's behavior, especially trying to block the plane, called it unacceptable. But he didn't stop stop there. He also pointed fingers at the airline staff and the flight crew for unsafe practices. Described the whole thing as a, and I'm quoting, breach of aviation safety protocol on all sides, which seems fair, based on what we know. But then came his directive. He urged the NCAA to suspend Kwam1 from flying for 6 months, and that's where it gets, well, a bit tricky. Raises questions about political interference, maybe.
Yeah, that's a very sensitive point, because the NCAA is meant to be an independent, autonomous body, right?
Yeah.
Pressuring it, or even appearing to pressure it, to take specific punitive action while its own investigation is likely still underway, especially when the root cause, the flask content, isn't settled. That's problematic. It risks undermining the NCAA's credibility, its independence. And the minister's comment that, the issue of whether he was carrying water or alcohol is not even an issue at this point. That specific phrase is highlighted as, well, quite troubling.
Troubling because, well, it feels like it dismisses the very thing that kicked this whole mess off, doesn't it?
Exactly. It undermines the whole basis for an objective investigation. The content of the flask is the issue, or at least it's the starting point, because that defines whether denying boarding was justified in the first place. Just brushing that aside, it sort of ignores the first domino that fell. And you can't really get to proper accountability if you ignore how it all began.
Right, so it's clear, really clear, that nobody comes out of this looking entirely blameless. Not Kwam1, not the staff, maybe not even the processes themselves. So how do we weigh it all up? How do we assign responsibility fairly? Kwam1's actions on the tarmac, yes, they broke the rules, definitely, but the source does note if he was wrongly singled out, treated unfairly over something harmless he got in a secure area. Well, that context helps explain. Doesn't excuse, but helps explain his reaction. Adds a layer of perspective, maybe. Dr. Joe Abba, a public policy expert, he summed it up quite well, I thought. He said, this was a needless confrontation that exposed multiple failures in protocol and professionalism. And crucially, both the musician and the airline staff members should be held accountable, but the initial trigger must not be glossed over.
And that's really the core takeaway, I think. This wasn't just some, celebrity meltdown story. It's symptomatic. It shows deeper issues, procedural failings, maybe rules weren't clear, assumptions overriding actual process. It's a cautionary tale, a real cautionary tale about how quickly things can unravel when established procedures aren't followed meticulously. So as the investigations wrap up, the real focus needs to be on figuring out exactly what went wrong at each stage, assigning responsibility where it's due fairly, and then critically, putting things in place, real mechanisms to stop this kind of thing from happening again. Because in aviation, trust isn't just about having rules on paper. It's about how consistently, how transparently those rules are applied to everyone. For the whole system to work, everyone needs to be accountable, especially maybe in situations like this where, frankly, nobody seems entirely right.
Absolutely. This deep dive really has peeled back the layers, hasn't it? We've seen individual actions, sure, but also unverified assumptions, serious procedural gaps, and even that question mark over potential regulatory overreach. It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? When you have individual behavior clashing with these complex, high-stakes systems, how do we make sure accountability is assigned fairly? And maybe more importantly, what are the real safeguards that stop a minor misunderstanding from spiraling completely out of control into a systemic crisis like this one? Makes you wonder.